So we have been for the last 2 weeks. Joe has done a fantastic job of kind of setting up and introducing this conversation about spiritual warfare. And so we have looked at kind of just the general idea of what the spiritual warfare is that's going on in our lives. Last week we looked a little bit at Satan and who he is in our life. And so today we are going to continue on this conversation about spiritual warfare and really get down and dig down deep into who this war is against. Because we need to understand, as we're going into battle in this spiritual context, who we are fighting and really what that looks like. And so we are going to cruise this morning. We got a lot of ground to cover. And so you can follow along. We've got notes in your bulletin there. If you have the Bible app on your phone, you can pull up the event that we have created there, and you can follow along there. Everything will be on the screen as well behind me. So we're just going to start it off this way. Paul talks about in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he says, fight the good fight of faith. And this should be a rally cry for us, to fight the good fight of faith. But here's the reality. What are we fighting? Or who are we fighting? Do we even know who we're fighting? Joe talked about it a little bit last week. We are going to continue that conversation today. If we're going to engage in this battle, if we are going to engage in the spiritual war that's going on around us, we have to understand who we are fighting against. We have to understand what we are fighting against. We have to put a name and a face to it. We have to try to understand why it is our enemy. And so we're going to get right into it. 3 general enemies that we are up against in this battle, in this struggle, in this spiritual war that we are in. 3 general enemies, and we're going to unpack each one of them, that we are up against in this battle. And the first one we talked about, Joe talked about last week. We are up against Satan. We are up against Satan, the devil, the tempter, the deceiver. Satan is an enemy of God. Satan is an enemy of God for he is an enemy of Christians for a few different reasons. And so let's unpack Satan here a little bit. Joe's talked quite a bit about this in the past couple weeks. Satan tempts Christians. Satan tempts Christians. He uses his influence and his power to provide temptation for believers. This is something that he desires to do. Satan seeks to use our weakness in order to deflect us away from God. And we see this throughout Scripture, and we certainly saw it at the beginning of time. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 says this, Now the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God made. He said to the woman, Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat from the fruit of from the trees in the garden, but the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, You must not eat it or touch it, or you will die. No, you will not die, the serpent said to the woman. In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Throughout the Bible, there is time and time again where Satan continues to tempt believers towards something that was not of God. Time and time again throughout the Bible, Satan is trying to tempt believers away from God. Jesus himself, at the beginning of his ministry, right after he's baptized, he goes out into the wilderness and he's tempted by Satan. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 12 tells us that Jesus himself was tempted and has suffered, and he is able to help those who are also being tempted and suffering as well. There are times where Satan is specifically coming after us, and he's specifically targeting our weaknesses. He is specifically tempting us, and we are to be ready, and we are to expect that. It should not catch us off guard when Satan tries to tempt us, especially in our areas of weakness. And so the first one, Satan tempts Christians. The second part of this little section is this: Satan deceives Christians. Satan desires to deceive Christians. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 through 3. For I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, because I have promised you in marriage to one husband to present a pure virgin to Christ. But I fear that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your minds may be seduced from a complete and pure devotion to Christ. Another aspect to this with Satan is that Satan's attacks on believers is ultimately an effort to deceive them. It's an ultimate effort to try and get our eyes taken off of God a little bit. And this can come in many different forms, in many different ways. Books, movies, TV shows that are out there have the appearance of being true, have the appearance of sharing truth and passing on truth to us, and yet they don't tell of the true God. There are fallacies within it. Preachers, authors, evangelists, other well-known speakers, they can stand up on a stage and they can say things, and they can sound like they are being true, and they can sound like it is good, solid doctrine on the surface, but when you really dig in and when you really listen and when you really put the Bible next to what they say, so many times they are preaching a gospel that is different than what Jesus preached. Church, we have to be careful about Satan trying to deceive us. A little bit of truth with a lot of fallacy, or a little bit of fallacy with a lot of truth, still is an effort to deceive us. We have to really watch this. In a time now where information and truth is available to you online, where you can Google anything you want and you can instantly have a result, and you're probably thinking, well, does Satan really deceive me? Well, you just Googled it there, and you can find out that you can actually be deceived by Satan. So often we just go and we take the first piece of information that is out there available to us, and we say, well, it's got to be true, but we must watch this. Church, we have to be careful. We must be watchful for the small things that are sprinkled into truth that are not. We must watch for the small things that Satan uses to distract us from the real God. Thirdly, with Satan accuses Christians. Satan accuses Christians. There are a lot of voices in the world speaking to us, aren't there? There are a lot of voices that want to speak into our life and try to direct our life and our thoughts. We have to be careful to choose wisely who we're listening to. Along with Satan's other work is his desire to speak untruths into our lives in order to get us to believe it. Not sure what's going on with this microphone. We're just going to keep going. One of the most dangerous things that Satan can do is to accuse believers. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, Satan is referred to as the accuser of the brothers. He is the one that is out there trying to falsely speak to us, to judge and put thoughts of condemnation into our mind, and then let those thoughts play out in our mind and kind of run rampant in our mind. And maybe every thought in your mind is how you're a failure, how you can't do anything right, how you just shouldn't try anything because everything you do is a failure. And you can play these multiple situations out in your mind as well. Satan puts a thought in your mind, and then pretty soon that has grown and grown and grown. The war that we are in, so much of it, as Joe has said, takes place in our mind. It takes place between our ears, right? And Satan plants a thought in our mind. He moves in. He tries to convince us that we are not a child of God. He tries to convince us that we are not saved, that we are not redeemed, that we're not promised eternity, that we're not loved, that we're not free from sin because of Christ's blood. He tries to convince us that we are lost, that we are forgotten, that we are uncared for, that we are sinful, that we are a mistake. Maybe you've had those thoughts. That's Satan trying to deceive us in our mind. Romans chapter 8, verse 31 through 34. What then are we to say about these things? If God is for us, who is against us? He did not even spare his own son, but offered him up for us all. How will he not also with him grant everything? Who can bring an accusation against God's elect? God is the one who justifies. Who is the one who condemns? Jesus Christ is the one who died, but even more has been raised. He also is at the right hand of God and intercedes for us. So we must understand that we are up against Satan in a battle here, and he uses things like deceit and untruth and accusations in order to try and get us off course and take our mind off of God. And so we're up against Satan. We've talked about that one before, but let's continue on in this conversation. The second thing that we're up against in this battle is we're up against the world around us. We're up against the world around us. Look around us in our world. Look at our culture. Look at our society. We are up against a world that is increasingly more and more secular, aren't we? Christian values are not held high. Christian wisdom and leadership is not sought after. Christian belief and support is not found much anymore. So it shouldn't surprise us in a time where culturally we are becoming less and less Christian. It should not surprise us then that there is an opposition to Christians from the world around us that doesn't share our same belief, that doesn't share our same worldview, that doesn't share following Christ and God with us. And that world will attack us. The world attacks us. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Several translations in this verse, popular verse, say, do not be conformed to the world. Don't be conformed to this age. Don't be conformed to the world. The world around us is different than we are, or at least it should be different than we are. Or rather, we should be different than the world around us. We should look different than the world around us, and the world attacks us as believers. Well, how does the world attack us? 3 ways. The world hates Christians. The world just hates Christians. John 15, 19 through 20. If you were of the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you. Remember the word I spoke to you. A slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. We have to expect this in our lives. As Christians, as believers, as followers of Jesus, we have to expect this in our lives. And if it can't be a shock. Like, this can't be a shock that we, from time to time, go through persecution. And if it is a shock, we have to understand that the persecution that even we go through here in America really is nothing compared to the world at large that Christians are going through. Christians are the most persecuted religious group around the world. And people are enduring real persecution like torture and death. And a little bit of persecution that we may endure is really nothing compared to that. A little pushback, a little snide comment because you're a believer is really nothing compared to that. And yet, it still doesn't make it less real for us, right? It doesn't make the persecution feel less real in our lives. It doesn't take away the fact that we are still receiving it. Jesus said, if he has chosen you out of the world, if you're a believer, if you're a follower of him, the world will hate you. And the world will persecute you. And so the question really that needs to be asked for all of us, and we need to answer this honestly, is, are we living our lives where we are known as being Christians? Does the world around us know that we are Christians, or are we living in a way that is different from the world around us? And if you answer no to that, if the only thing that shows in your life that you are a Christian, that you follow Jesus as your Sunday morning church attendance, I'm going to be a little concerned about that, and so should you. If the only thing that shows in our lives that we follow Jesus is that we show up here on Sunday morning, and nothing else is different, and we are no different from the world around us outside of being here on Sunday morning instead of watching, NFL pregame shows or whatever else is on TV in the morning, we should be concerned about that. Our faith may not be as real as we think it is. Our lives must reflect Christ in all areas of our life. So we must be different than the world that is around us. So because of that difference, the world will hate us. Second thing, the world teaches fallacies. Just like Satan tries to accuse and deceive, the world itself teaches fallacies as well. We live in a world of half-truths, of no absolute truth, of fake news, of me too and him too, and I stand with whoever, and all this different stuff, and the truth is decided on by whoever is the loudest, who's ever standing on stage, whoever is being listened to, and there seems to be no foundation in our culture for what is actually fact, what is actually true, and what isn't. And in this time, it should be, again, not a surprise to us that there are false truths out there trying to deceive us, and maybe it's an intentional attempt to try and spread lies. Maybe it's an honest attempt of somebody who doesn't see the lies. Whatever the case, there is and always will be lies that are trying to deceive us and spread around us. And Paul warns Timothy about this as well. It's very much so true again today. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 through 4. For a time will come when they will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear something new. They will turn away from hearing the truth and will turn aside to myths. Sound doctrine, basic truths will not be believed. Instead, people will want to hear what they want to hear. They will want to believe whatever is popular, whatever is attractive, whatever will gain favor is spread around. People long to hear those things. People long to hear the things that make them feel good inside. So believers, what are we doing about this? Do you believe everything you hear? You believe everything you read, that you Google, that you see on TV, that you read in the newspaper? Do you automatically trust somebody just because he stands on a stage and has a microphone? Or he stands in a pulpit or has a TV show? Do we automatically believe everything that we hear? Because I think we should be more like the people in Berea that Paul interacts with in Acts chapter 17. They had a practice of not just hearing and taking in what was being said, but taking time and also examining everything that was being said to make sure that it was actually truth and in line with truth. We need this in our lives. We need this practice in our lives, not to just believe whoever has a large following or a loud voice. We need to examine what is being said versus what God says in His Word. Don't be deceived by the world. Finally, the world tries to seduce Christians. The world tries to seduce Christians. 1 John chapter 2, 15 through 16. Do not love the world or the things that belong to the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him. For everything that belongs to the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride in one's lifestyle is not from the Father, but is from the world. Not only does the world hate believers and teach falsely, it also tries to seduce believers back to it. It tries to seduce believers back to it. It's the pull to live a lifestyle of others around us. It's the pull to try and compete and live up to everybody else that runs around in our circles. It's about achieving the American dream, whatever that is these days. It's about keeping up with the lifestyle that we see around us and people that we work with or in our friends or the people on TV. It's about having all the gadgets and the equipment and having the nice house and a good, solid, rich retirement. It's ultimately about pursuing something other than God first in your life. It's about pursuing something other than God as most important in your life. And at the end of your life, like if we could just honestly answer this question right now for us, for our lives, if we can make an honest evaluation of how we lived our life, the life that we were given, what would be said at the end of our life? That you lived a life focused on and dedicated to God, or would it be something else? Would our life be summed up as pursuing richness or pursuing stuff or pursuing a higher status in our job? Don't be seduced, church. Don't be pulled back into our world. The world tries to pull us back. And so our enemies thus far, Satan, the devil, and then the world around us. Finally, thirdly, this morning, we are up against our own flesh. We are up against our own flesh. Romans chapter 7, verse 15 through 23. For I do not understand what I am doing, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree with the law that is good. So now I am no longer the one doing it, but is the sin living in me. For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is my own, in my flesh. For the desire to do what is good is with me, but there is no ability to do it. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do. Now, if I do what I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it, but it is the sin that lives in me. So I discover this principle. When I want to do what is good, evil is within me. For in my inner self, I joyfully agree with God's law. But I see a different law in the parts of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and taking me prisoner to the law of sin in the parts of my body. The hardest thing for me, and I would guess for many of us sitting in this room, is struggling through this battle that is in my own life, that is in my own flesh. That is my own desire, my own want, my own pull towards something other than God in my life. The pull in my life towards sin, the pull in my life towards wealth or popularity or acceptance, the pull towards other things in my life other than God. The struggle is real in our lives. The struggle is real in our lives, and the struggle is real in our own flesh as well. The struggle is real against Satan and how he attacks us. The struggle is real between us as believers and the world that is out there against us, and the struggle is real, honestly, between me and myself, between me and my flesh. But God. It's a fantastic phrase, right? But God, in his grace and in his mercy, offers us a way to fight against these struggles. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to unpack these more. We're going to look at tools and how ultimately we win in this battle, in this struggle that we are in. But we want to end with this, realizing we're in a struggle. We're realizing that the struggle is around us. We can do a couple things. We can ignore the struggle. Honestly, that's easier. It's easier to ignore the struggle, or we can engage in the struggle. And that's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. To ignore is to forget the fact that we as believers are under attack, that a world is out there attacking us, that Satan is attacking us, that we are in this battle in our own flesh. To ignore is to ignore the fact that we are in a battle. To engage is to stand up and say you are going to be proactive in protecting your faith and the faith of those around you. That you will not give in to the attacks of Satan, that you will not believe the lies of the world, that you will fight the battle in your own flesh and in your own mind. Church, engage in this battle. Engage in this struggle. Engage, stand up, and fight. It starts with a choice. And we've spent 3 weeks now kind of unpacking this struggle and how the struggle is real and how the struggle is out there, and we have real enemies that are against us. Church, what are you going to do? Are you going to ignore it, or are you going to engage with it? It starts with a choice. Will you ignore, or will you engage? Let's pray. Father, I am, again, just thankful for this opportunity that we get to be here, that we get to open your word, that we get to continue to just talk about this topic of the spiritual battle that is going on around us. And God, I pray for each one of us that is a believer, that is a follower of you, that we would not choose to ignore this, that this would not just be something that we forget about, but that we engage in this, that we are actively looking to see the attacks that are coming from our enemies, that we're actively trying to prevent them, that we're actively fighting against them. Father, give us the strength and the courage to stand up and fight and to engage for our faith, for the faith of those that we love, for the faith of those that are around us, so that ultimately we can bring glory and honor to you. We thank you for Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. It's in his name that I pray this. Amen.